Alan Arkish here, and I'm here to say goodbye to Marty Balin, one of the founders of the Jefferson Airplane and a singer whose voice I like very, very much. I've seen the Jefferson Airplane play maybe 25, 30 times, and they were one of the most exciting, dynamic bands that I've ever seen. I saw them first in February of 1967, but I heard about them first in 1966. So in honor of Marty, I want to tell you what I know about the band. He was a guitar player hanging around in San Francisco in 1965 when he met another guitar player by the name of Paul Kantner. And that's Marty Balin and that's Paul Kantner. And the two of them were folk singers, but they decided to form a rock and roll band. And then they added a singer. Her name is Signe Anderson. And right around that time, Marty bought a pizza parlor and turned it into a club so we would have a place to play. And that club was called the Matrix. And the Airplane played there all the time as they grew and added members. A band called Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin played there. Another band called the Great Society. It was kind of like the CBGBs of San Francisco. And we're talking 65, right? And edging into 66. And that's when they added Jorma Kaukonen on guitar, who brought his best friend with him. That's Jack Cassidy, one of the great bass players in rock and roll history. And they needed a drummer, and so they hired a friend of theirs who had never played drums before, and his name was Skip Spence. Skip lasted through the first album, then he went off and formed his own band, the fabulous Moby Grape. So this combination of the Jefferson Airplane played the first dance concert in San Francisco. It was a benefit put on by, of all people, Bill Graham for the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And about a month later, Bill started putting on concerts at what was going to become the Fillmore West. And the Jefferson Airplane were there all the time. And that's when they got seen by RCA Records. And RCA really liked them and signed them to a contract. Now, this is 65. The record companies do not understand this whole group of artists, but they went in the studio and in a couple of days they recorded their first record. And this is the Jefferson Airplane Takes Off. It does not sound like their other records. It's more folk rock, and there's a lot of wonderful harmonies between Marty Balin and Signe Anderson. It's not as harsh and edgy as the Airplane, and it's got some wonderful songs like Let Me In, It's No Secret, Come Up the Years. It's a very romantic record. But after a couple months of playing it, it didn't sell that many records, and Signe became pregnant, and she wanted to leave the band. Now, you can buy the last concert she did with the band. They were really good live, unlike so many bands of this era. They were essentially live bands at dance halls. And so when they went in the studio, it was a whole new learning process. But the Airplane didn't want to stop without Signe, and Marty and Paul had seen this singer who played all the time at the Matrix. She was in a band called the Great Society, and so they hired Grace Slick. Good call, okay. 3 weeks later, they're in Los Angeles recording. For 4 days, they recorded on what was going to be their second album, and it was nothing but fights between them and the record company, because the record company kept censoring their lyrics and was not crazy about their music, and certainly all the pot smoking that went on in the studio. So they went home to San Francisco for a weekend. They played, they rehearsed, and they came back for the final 4 days of recording, and they brought let's say it's a diplomat, to sort of translate between their desires and the record company. Someone who could be understood by both of them. Who would you choose for that job? Right, Jerry Garcia. And his credit on the record, I believe, is Captain Trips. So Jerry ran, blocked and stuff for them, and they recorded 2 songs that Grace had brought with her from the Great Society. Somebody to Love and White Rabbit. Okay, so this album goes out there, and they don't make those 2 songs the first single because they're geniuses at RCA, but when they do, Somebody to Love goes up the charts, and this album, Surrealistic Pillow, which was named by Jerry Garcia, that's his name for the album, is the biggest album of the summer of love. It went to #3, okay? And White Rabbit, you cannot listen to White Rabbit without thinking of San Francisco and hippies. This is the soundtrack and the definitive hippie album, and I must say it deserves all its praise. There are almost every song on this is good. This is as good an album, a rock album as they have ever made. Okay, so I love this record. And the Airplane went out and started to tour. And that's when I saw them for the first time in March of 1967. Okay, so they had already, the album was only out a month, and I was thrilled by it. I was playing it all the time on the college radio station where I was a DJ. And we saw them, me and my friend Dennis and Susan Miller and Leslie Maitland saw them at the Cafe Go-Go in Greenwich Village, which was a small nightclub which was underneath the Bleecker Street Cinema. And they were terrific, okay? So the Airplane are out there touring, and now they're getting rich. So they made a lot of money on that record. And I tried to actually book them into Franklin and Marshall College, but they're out there touring and stuff, and the record company wants them to go back in the studio and do another record. And so they do, but this time, none of this 8-day stuff. They were in and out of that place for 3 or 4 months and spent a fortune making this record, which is actually my favorite Jefferson Airplane record. It's called After Bathing at Baxter's, and it's a very psychedelic record. Interesting side note, on the day that I bought this record, I also bought this record, all right? 2 of the most psychedelic records ever made, Satanic Majesty's Request by the Rolling Stones. And the third thing I bought that day was 2 tabs of mescaline, which my roommate and I shared, and that's how we got to know these records. You don't need the mescaline to love those records. The Airplane actually went back to the Matrix, and this is the last concert of the Matrix. They closed it down, and they recorded that concert. I saw them at the Fillmore East in the spring of '68, and they were thrilling. The sort of dynamics between Grace and Marty, it's all right there. His intensity on stage, and their voices would intertwine and soar, and they never did the songs twice the same way. And this is what it looked like. Put yourself back, okay? There's the Airplane, and behind them is the fabulous Glenn McKay Headlights. And they would play on, and they were great, and they came back several times that summer. The next record that they put out is this one. It's called, give me a second here, Crown of Creation, okay? Came out in September of 1968. And by then I was working at the Fillmore East, and when they came and played there, I was having interreactions with the band. This is not their best record, but it's got some good stuff on it, you know. I like this record. Don't love it, but you know what? We'd love to have it today. So they came, recorded them again because at the Fillmore East. This is another live one from the 1969 in the fall of '69. Now, like all these San Francisco bands, they were primarily live bands who were trying to get their sound on a record or get their live sound onto vinyl. And they recorded a lot of concerts, and they put this one out, which is really one of the best live records of the period. It's the Airplane at their best. The recordings are from the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West. It's got the hits on it, and it's got all kinds of interesting stuff, like a Donovan song called The Fat Angel, and a couple of jams, and this great Fred Neil song called The Other Side to This Life. Another one of my favorites. Am I telling you I like all these records? Well, I love the Jefferson Airplane. That's why we're here. Then they put out Volunteers for America, which is their most political record. A lot of political protest songs on it, and an inexplicable centerfold. Remember when records had centerfolds? So in the middle of all this stuff about fascism and America's going too far, etc., you got your peanut butter and jelly. All right. Another recording. This is a 1969 recording at the Fillmore East. Now, what was happening in the band was not good. Marty was drinking a lot, and the band was using a lot of coke. And they had added another drummer, Spencer Dryden, and he is having a relationship with Grace Slick. And Grace had basically, well, I won't say that she slept with everyone in the band, but she said she slept with everyone in the band but Marty, okay? Now, there was a lot of tension in the band, and they used to wear these little pineapples around their neck, made out of ivory, and inside them were cocaine. So they could be pretty edgy and were not that much fun to be around except for Marty. And they had asked the crew, they'd hired the crew to come in one night and be there as they rehearsed. I assume they were rehearsing for Volunteers or another record. And no one showed up but Marty. And Marty sat there for like 2 hours, just steaming. And when the rest of them trickled in, he read them the riot act. It was one of the more memorable fights I've ever seen a band get into. They later went on and did this kind of stuff, you know, records that I kind of lost track of and I didn't love. Hot Tuna, which was a spin-off. Now they also, if you really, this is really complete. This is Fly Jefferson Airplane has a whole lot of their TV appearances. Stuff that they did to playback on shows like American Bandstand, and also some performances that were filmed live. They are really intense, okay? They're singing White Rabbit, and the instruments aren't plugged in, but Grace is giving her all. Plus, there's a performance of Somebody to Love where they're singing on a rooftop in Manhattan, and it's being filmed by Jean-Luc Godard, and that footage is in here. Now, really, really choice Airplane stuff is from Monterey Pop. There's like 3 or 4 songs in there, and you really get a sense watching them of what it was like to be on stage, you know, see them on stage at their peak and how they played off of each other. I'm gonna just turn this down a little bit, much as I don't want to. Okay, this is called Blues from an Airplane. Great song. Plus, this box set has a lot of outtakes in them, so Monterey Pop, it's, you know, it's got Otis Redding in it. It's got Jimi Hendrix. It's got The Who destroying all their instruments. This is one of the definitive rock concert albums of all time. The granddaddy of them all, which of course they appear at. Peace, Love, and Woodstock. Don't you love this? See this fringe? I think this fringe is from David Crosby's jacket. At least that's what they told me at the store. Limited edition. So the Airplane was supposed to go on at like 8 at night, and things were running late. They went on at 5 in the morning, and they sounded a little bit, okay? I think Grace yelled like, "Good morning, madness!" And they do Volunteers for America and a couple of their songs, and you get a good look at them, you know, 1969, good stuff. But then came the reckoning. They were gonna play for free at Altamont, opening for the Rolling Stones, okay? It didn't go well. And Marty started interfering when the Hells Angels were pushing people around, and for his efforts, he got the shit kicked out of him and knocked out cold by one of the Angels with a billiard cue, okay? If you haven't seen this movie, you know, this is a definitive point in time of rock and roll when there was time to grow up, okay? I feel like I should tell you one more Marty Balin story, maybe the only one I really have. Now, you can imagine what the atmosphere around the Jefferson Airplane was like at the Fillmore East. And so when they would come, there'd be all these people coming to visit them, and around them there was a lot of interesting people. So my job on the stage crew was sometimes to guard the different entrances and check everyone's pass, et cetera, and I'm at the back door when they're playing there, and there's a knock at the back door, and I open it up, and there's a guy in a top hat, okay, and with him is a lady, and she's got long hair that she's ironed, and she's got like 1,000 beaded necklaces around her neck, and he's got a cane, and I said, "Oh, hello, how are you?" And they said, "We're here to see Marty Balin." I said, "Oh, is your name on the list?" And they go, and I said, "What's your name?" And he says, "I'm Space and she's Time." So I look on the list, there's no listing for Space or Time. And I tell them so, "You're not on the list, Space and Time." And they go, "Could you go and talk to Marty, please? I know he's gonna wanna see us. And we're friends of Marty, we know him really well." Okay, Space, Time, I'll be right back. So I close the door and I go up the stairs. to the airplane's dressing room. Have you ever been in a Fellini movie? Okay. So I'm winding through the stairs, and it's like, this is a late show in the airplane, or, you know, it's like 1 in the morning, and it's insane in the hallways. And there's Marty, and he's got himself a drink and everything. I say, hey, Marty, he says, how are you? And I said, great. Just a little something. There's 2 people at the back door that want to see you, but their names aren't on the list. Oh, he says, oh, what's their names? I said, Space and Time. He goes, Space and Time are at the back door? I said, yeah, you know them? He says, yeah, I know them. They're too weird. Don't let them in. Now, if you are too weird for the Jefferson Airplane, you are too weird. So I go down to the back door, and I say, open door, and I say, I'm sorry, Space and Time, but Marty can't see you. And Space says, why? And I said, he thinks you're too weird. I go, oh, I can understand that. Closed the door and went away. So I have that memory. Marty was just a really terrific guy. And he always treated the stage crew well, and he treated us well. And his singing, I played a little bit now. Just go back and listen to the old Airplane stuff. He had a beautiful voice and was a beautiful soul. And he quit the Airplane in '71 and quit drinking and became, you know, studied yoga. And his whole life for the rest of it was, he had this memories of being in a rock band to look back on, and he was still singing till he died. So, Marty, we're going to miss you. And I remember when you had those buttons that said Jefferson Airplane loves you.